Today's episode of Spectre Creative is brought to you by the moon. When you're out at night and you're looking for something up in the sky, choose the moon. Welcome back to Spectre Creative, your channel for all things fun and toy. With me, your host, Scott Toy Guru Neitlich. And today we're going to talk about toy companies, and specifically their logos, and well, actually, not really as much their logos as much their names. There's a lot of toys, there's a lot of brands, and there's a lot of companies out there. Many have been bought by other companies. And we're going to start by jumping into one of my personal favorites, the maker of action figures galore from the 80s, Kenner Corporation. So, Kenner, yes, a favorite toy company now owned by Hasbro. They made quite a few toys in the 1980s that we probably all grew up with, from Care Bears to Star Wars. Well, they were a big part of our childhood. And many of us were gobbling up those toys by Kenner, not even knowing what Kenner meant or where they were located. Well, they were a Cincinnati-based toy company, which was a huge part of their brand and essence. And while one of my favorite toys, of course, was their Ghostbusters line with the torture device you could use to, torture ghosts, or as I did, torture my action figures. Of course, what really put them on the map was Star Wars. They were the company that believed in Star Wars from day one when everyone else turned down the license. No one else wanted to touch this. But they did, and that's really what made Kenner a huge toy company. Well, this Cincinnati-based company, which was started by Albert Phillip and Joseph Steiner in 1946, right after World War II, got into the toy and game category pretty early on and pretty right away. While some toy companies eventually became manufacturers of play product, both Albert Phillip and Joseph Steiner knew this is what they wanted to do right away. And what does the name Kenner mean when it's not in either one of their names? Well, like I said, Cincinnati was a big part of their image and the heart of really their line, their company. They were located on Kenner Street. Yep, Kenner is known as Kenner Toy Company because that was their address. Welcome to Kenner Street, USA, everyone, where Kenner Toys was made. All right, next up, let's look at one of the biggest toy companies that's still around, Mattel. I actually had the absolute privilege of working for Mattel for about a decade, and while there, I actually got to learn a lot about their history because it's plastered all over the walls in the design center with colorful murals and dioramas showing their history. Their current building is in El Segundo, California. This is the corporate office, the 15-story tower where all of the president and demand planning and accounting and all of that works. The toy design happens down the block at their design center, which is where I actually worked. Their original headquarters was in Hawthorne, California, and, was a much smaller building. They've obviously grown a lot since they were founded in 1945 by Harold Matson and Elliot Handler. Now, Harold isn't pictured here. That's Ruth Handler with her husband Elliot, because, well, Harold got sick and passed away, passing it off to Ruth. But between all of their original toys like that ukulele and their partnership with Disney to bring the very first Mickey Mouse toys to market, as well as the breakthrough in the 1960s with Hot Wheels, which was named by Elliot because when he saw them, he said, wow, those little cars have some Hot Wheels. And that's where that name comes from. Barbie, their other flagship line, was named after Elliot and Ruth's daughter, Barbara. And Ken was actually their son. So Barbie and Ken were actually Barbara and Kenneth Handler, their two children. And while the company has been known as a premier manufacturer of fashion dolls and small racing cars, this actually wasn't the biggest toy line they had. What actually kind of put on the map in the 1960s was
guns. Lots of guns.
Yes, the toy gun, Mattel's biggest seller in the 1950s and 60s. Obviously, Mattel does not make toy guns anymore, and this is actually an official policy of the company to no longer make any kind of weaponry. But man, throughout the first couple decades of the toy company's history, their replicas and their licensed guns for things like Lone Ranger and Davy Crockett was huge because, hey, that is how kids played, and Mattel was right there to make sure they had the toys that they were into. So about that logo, well, much like Mr. Sparkle, the Mattel logo is a combination of two things. The original founders, Harold Matson and Elliot Handler, I mentioned that Harold passed away pretty quickly with Ruth Handler taking over, but when it was originally founded with Matt Matson and Elliot Handler, well, Mattel was literally a combination of their names, with the Matt from Matson and the L from Elliot Handler. And that's what Mattel means. Two people who founded a company and went on to become a billion-dollar toy empire. Pretty cool. They also make He-Man. All right, next up, let's talk about their other big competitor across the country, Hasbro from Rhode Island. So Hasbro started off actually as a fabric and textile company in 1923. They branched out after the Great Depression and during World War II, making school supplies like crayons, markers, and clay. And it really wasn't until the 1950s that they really got into toys with their first big hit, Mr. Potato Head, which, yeah, if you didn't know, was actually made from a potato or any type of vegetable, onions, all sorts of things you could plug the pieces in. It wasn't plastic. You would actually get a potato and stick different parts in the potato. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s that it became plastic. Well, Hasbro, much like other family companies, was formed by three brothers, the Hassenfeld brothers. So Herman, Hillel, and Henry in 1923, Henry pictured here, decided to go into business and, although they've all passed away at this point, the company is still in the original family's control with the grandson now running the company. So that's basically the name again. Hassenfeld Brothers became Hasbro. Makes sense? You've got three brothers. They all have the last name. We're going to name the company after them. And that's where Hasbro came from. They've now acquired quite a few smaller companies, especially game companies, and are now the number 2 toy maker. Okay, let's go back and look at another one, Milton Bradley, speaking of games. So Milton Bradley is a company that is now owned by Hasbro and was once the biggest manufacturer of board games next to Parker Brothers. Their games were huge in the 1950s and 60s with original games like Operation, and to say they were some of the most popular games and with both original and licensed characters is almost an understatement. Every household had a Milton Bradley game. Of course, who doesn't remember the fun of playing Shenanigans? Right? You guys all played that over and over again.
Shenanigans! Shenanigans! Shenanigans!
Well, the first Milton Bradley game was actually the Checkered Game of Life, going all the way back to 1860. It eventually morphed into the Game of Life, but this company, which is over 150 years old, was originally founded as a game company, as a novelty game company in the 1860s. And if you hadn't guessed, Milton Bradley as a company was formed by Milton Bradley. Yep, that's him. He just named the company after himself. And that's where Milton Bradley comes from. The MB logo that you see on all those games growing up with started with a gentleman after the Civil War who decided, I'm going to go into the game business. And he did, changing gameplay in America forever. We still remember this logo very fondly before it kind of got eaten up by larger companies, but the games that Milton Bradley put out still live on, even if they're under new logos and distributed by new companies. The fun and excitement of a Milton Bradley game remains. A modern company, jumping from an older one, Jakks Pacific. So this company is only about 25 years old as opposed to hundreds of years old like Milton Bradley. They're mainly originally remembered as the makers of WWE action figures. It's really what put Jakks Pacific on the map. Their ability to not only produce accurate characters, but to have fresh casebacks constantly was very innovative. Jakks is a company that's made up of lots of smaller companies they acquired. Companies like Just Play and Remco, which was a big toy company in the 80s making action figures and electronics toys. By buying up smaller companies and acquiring their IP and the rights to their product, Jakks Pacific was able to very quickly put together a portfolio to launch to market. It was created by Jack Freeman, formerly from LJN, and that's what the company name means, Jack's. So, because the company was located in California, originally Malibu and now Santa Monica, hence it became Jack's Pacific. In other words, it was Jack's Pacific Toy Company. But the name was spelled with two K's to invoke the original toy icon of a Jack toy, which they use in their logo. All right, Parker Brothers. So, much like Hasbro, you're probably saying, well, it was probably some guys named Parker who were brothers. Now, while Milton Bradley did a lot of games, Parker Brothers did some of the most iconic games of all time, including Monopoly and Clue, which was invented during World War II in Britain and originally called Cluedo.
Even if you were right, that would be 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1, not 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1.
Okay, fine. 1 plus 2 plus 1. Shut up!
But much like Milton Bradley, Parker Brothers goes back to the 1800s, specifically 1883. Their first game, Bankin', was a huge hit, followed by Hukum. All of their games were basically part of 1800s pop culture. From card games to board games, they were really innovative in helping to create the board game category and introduce it as a form of entertainment and leisure for the upper class. And as guessed, there were brothers. It started with George S. Parker, who formed the company and called it the George S. Parker Company. But when his brother Charles joined in 1888, the company changed its name to the Parker Brothers. And very similar to Hasbro with the Hassenfeld brothers, you clearly had an easy name to understand. There were two brothers, they shared the same name, and they ran a toy company. And much like Milton Bradley, it's also now owned by Hasbro, helping them dominate the board game category simply by buying up board game companies and continuing their outstanding games at market. Will probably never be without Monopoly. So that's a first view at toy company names. If you'd like to see a follow-up video or look at other toy companies and how they formed, what their names actually mean, let me know in the comments below. To comment back on all of them, subscribe and give it a like. It tells YouTube to share this with other people, and that's the whole fun of this, is sharing toy fun. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.